Welcome to the MVP Show. Today I've got Paul Culmsee. He's an IT veteran, 25 plus years experience, specifically in the area of management consulting, as well as a vast background in SharePoint. And it's very interesting listening to his story today, quite different than a lot of MVPs that are in the program. And I hope that you learn something new from Paul. I certainly did. So let's get underway with the show. Remember, full show notes can be found at nz365guy.com/237. Now let's get underway. Hey, Paul, welcome to the MVP Show.
Thanks, Mark. Nice to be here.
Good to have you on the show, Paul. You're based in WA, is that right? Western Australia?
Correct, yes.
So what's life been like there in the last couple of months for you?
Probably two things. Like New Zealand, I'm in a fairly isolated place, so I think I've come to appreciate that I probably live in like the best place in the world right now, being such an isolated city, Perth, and incredibly busy because the stuff that I do has been fairly front and center in responding to a lot of the COVID stuff. So I've been busier than I ever have been, so very thankful for that.
Okay, so to get some bit of background on you, just tell us a bit about the company that you run and the kind of business environment that's kind of put you in this very busy state recently.
My company is called Seven Sigma, and yes, it is a joke. It's kind of like that Simpsons episode where they formed the B Sharps barbershop quartet and it got less funny over time. But it was literally a beer conversation. We said, why go six? Let's go seven. And so we've always been a management consulting-esque technology organization. So we spent a very long time in SharePoint, got very good at SharePoint. That's just because I think the management consulting side helped a lot with that. And then when the Power Platform came along, we pivoted that way because it was sort of clear to me. I got that same feeling. You don't get it very often, but in late 2006, I realized that SharePoint 2007 was just going to be mega huge, and that's what led down that path. And 4 years ago, it was just plainly obvious to me that Power Apps the Power Platform was just going to go absolutely ballistic. So we sort of pivoted down that area, developed some skills in that area. And a lot of the low-code stuff means you can respond to circumstances very quickly. So I was on a Corona response team for a large organization. And, I was literally living the plot line of one of those movies, where the Joint Chiefs of Staff are all in the room. And then you get the odd technical person comes in every so often and feeds them some info. And so basically I lived that for sort of 3 months solid. And literally, you can't even plan projects around that. Requirements would change every half day. There was a time where there was actually high-risk countries, and there was all this focus on that. And then suddenly it was like, well, they're all high-risk now. All the work you've been doing suddenly has to change. So these low-code tools held up extremely well in that area and allowed us to respond incredibly quickly to the changing circumstances that we were facing.
Very cool, very cool. Now, you said something here at the start, and I just want to clarify for our listeners. You said that you are a company that is management consulting led, and when I was in Australia, I worked for a company, SMS Management Technology, and we were a management consultancy as well. And kind of like the system integrator, which is what most Microsoft partners kind of fit into the category of, was a different thing. And you're the first probably other person I've come across that's kind of used this word management consulting in regards to still doing SI work as well. How do you see that kind of key differentiation being management consulting led?
Oh goodness, that could go on for a while. So I'll give you the quick version. I do work in completely different discipline to IT. So for me, I do facilitation and what I would call sense-making work for organizations and management teams on helping them crack the nut on some hard problems they're dealing with. And that was in areas like urban planning and strategic planning, corporate retreats, all that sort of stuff. If you've ever gone to one of those corporate retreats, sometimes I'm the guy that's helping to run them. So that's a completely different world than the technology world, and it put me into all sorts of interesting areas. And so that's management consulting, helping organizations make difficult or complex decisions and facilitating that to happen. So Even though, there are some system integrators that, you might get a few people that, I don't know, do some courses or there are many agile coaches that might think they're management consultants, but I'd probably say if you haven't gone and done it completely outside your discipline, in a pure kind of way, maybe that's a little bit different. Probably sounds, a little bit snobbish, and that's not my intent, but that's kind of what I mean by it anyway.
Yeah. No, it is quite different, right? Because often SIs come from purely a technology background. They've come from, if they've been doing for some time, probably network infrastructure days, and then into client server operating systems, and then into the various apps that run on those platforms, rather than starting off with, business challenges and coming up with solutions of those that might include technology and might not.
I think one way to look at it is years ago, one of my defining projects was a SharePoint project. It was a failed SharePoint project in the sense that, pretty much for the what they invested, they didn't have a lot to show for it. This is going back to 2007, by the way. But the upshot of that was I came across the work of a guy who more or less stated, very profound for me at the time, sounds kind of quaint now, but he says, look, projects fail because of lack of shared understanding of the problem. Nothing to do with scope. Scope's just the symptom. The root cause is lack of shared understanding. So the question you should be asking is not, how do you get this damn project in scope? And I think that's what the system integrators tend to do. There's this kind of bias. If you suddenly go, well, how do you get a shared understanding of the problem? If you suddenly think about what you would do to achieve that, there's not a lot of technology involved in that. And that's a whole different set of sort of competencies and tools in the toolkit that most organizations are not even aware of. And so, I think an SI thinks, oh, yeah, throw a project manager in there and a business analyst and off we go. And so it's almost partly a mindset thing driven by working back from that kind of question.
Quite different. And I've seen a lot of SIs want to develop management consulting type arms, and what I've observed, they seem to struggle in going that way into the mix rather than coming from management consulting into the IT, which you're seeing a lot of the big companies like Deloitte and EY and things like that now starting to move heavily into the space, but they've come from that management consulting background.
Well, actually, they're moving heavily into that space quite deliberately as a hedge against the SI. So they have a bit of a ceiling. We kind of snuck through. But if you think of it from a management consultant's perspective, they charge lots and they're highly profitable. And if every SI, because the managed services industry suddenly disappears because, hey, it's Office 365 now and cloud services, then they're naturally going to want to move up the value chain. And it's not in the interests of the big four to keep them moving up the value chain. So if they acquire technical competencies, then they sort of keep the SIs in that sort of layer where they would like them to be. And it's only the smaller companies like us that have niche skills that no one else has that allows us to sneak through that glass ceiling and kind of get into that area.
So how did you stumble upon SharePoint back in the day?
I'm old. So in 1998, I was the administrator of a document management system called PC Docs Open, for all you old listeners. Now, PC Docs Open at that time was pretty industry leading, up there with Documentum. And so I was familiar with metadata, document management, and all of that sort of stuff. The first version of SharePoint came along and, to my eyes, I just kind of dismissed it out of hand. It really was pretty basic. The 2003 version came out. I still dismissed it. However, we used it. I was working for an organization that, believe it or not, in 2003 managed to throw away the file server and go the document library kind of regime. 2007 version came out, and this is almost a decade since I'd started in this space. I suddenly saw that it could do almost everything these enterprise document management systems could do when I started in 98. Not everything, but enough. There was enough there that I just was like, this thing is going to go ballistic. So I'm going to start specializing in SharePoint because I've done document management before. And then I kind of naively sort of went, because I've got a bit of an understanding of sort of the organizational side of things. I'm sure I've got a 6-month head start, and then everyone will get good at it. So I'm better make use of this 6-month window I have. Well, that was probably more of about a decade, I think, just because of exactly what you said about systems integrators. I think there was a bit of a blind spot there. And if you don't know you have a blind spot, you'll keep on doing the same things you'll do. So that was really how it happened. I just saw that it was going to be massive, as simple as that, and I kind of opportunistically thought, I've got the right skills for this. I'll give it a go.
Tell me about books, writing books. I see you've got a couple up there on Amazon. How did you go down that path? And tell us about what your hindsight knowledge is after writing books.
So the books have nothing whatsoever to do with SharePoint. They come back to that core question I said earlier. How do you get a shared understanding of the problem? Because I had by this time facilitated lots of different workshops and been involved in some pretty major decision making exercises. Like one of them was a $500 million procurement strategy for a freeway to be upgraded. That kind of level of complexity. And so I ended up writing a book about my adventures there because I learned that a lot of the practices that were being done in IT, and IT thought itself of being very sort of novel and modern, particularly some of the agile practices I was seeing. A lot of that, the construction industry were hugely more mature than what I was seeing in the IT industry, despite the prevailing kind of narrative. So I thought I've got to take some of these learnings in sense making and how to actually align a group of disparate users and how to identify when you're dealing with a complex problem or one that's slippery. It was really, that was the intent. So the first book was called The Heretic's Guide to Best Practices because I was seeing some truly awful things done in the name of best practices, particularly in the SharePoint space. And to this day, you can see that they're tough they're tough projects to get right. So that was what that one was about. The second book, I also found that when I was dealing with problems that are highly ambiguous, and I got to see how different people coped with stressful and ambiguous problems. And that led to the second book, which is called The Art of Harnessing Ambiguity, The Heritage Guide to Management. I wrote them with a guy who has 2 PhDs. He's like super ridiculously smart and has a background in academia. So, if he's the brains behind it really. But so that was where the books came from. They were not motivated by technology work. And then also on a practical sense, I was like, if I wrote a SharePoint book, I would have to then write a new version every 3 years. If I write like a business book, a management book, that one can sit there for a while. So it won't sort of date. So that was that. In terms of the process of writing a book, I don't think it was as bad for me as potentially others. Certainly there are times where it's such a big mental undertaking, but it was something that I wanted to do. And we actually wrote half of the book before we even decided that we'd publish it, So we'd already just kind of been doing quite a bit of that, intellectual scaffolding, or it's almost like doing a PhD in a way, isn't it? Just all the research and all of that. And because it was making me a better consultant, it was helping me skills wise in terms of doing what I was doing. So that's really best answer I can give on that one. I'd love to write a third book. We have plans for a third book. It's me. I don't have time at the moment because of the just the sheer action that's happening in the low-code power platform side of the world.
Tell me what kind of feedback. I see you got some pretty high ratings on those books on Amazon. What type of feedback you had from people reflecting back after reading them?
A lot of people, I think it uses the sort of humor that Australians and Kiwis would appreciate. So there's a little bit of satire in there. So you'll get people saying things like, yeah, it was sort of one of the more funny kind of management books I've read. Another review, which I think is pretty good, is it actually is almost a design thinking book before that term was even coined. So it really focuses on design, really from where it actually originated. Like I won't go down the kind of intellectual black hole of telling you the origins of the design movement from the 60s or anything like that. But so it was the practicality of taking a lot of these ideas that have been around for a long, long time. But they sit in journals and no one's ever going to read them, and some of them have a lot of value. So we thought we're going to approach this like you're sitting in a bar with someone and you're having a conversation. And so that I think has been the core of the feedback. I think they liked the accessible style and how we wrote, and the ideas we pulled together. No one had really pulled those ideas together in the same way.
Nice, really good. Tell me about your MVP journey. How did it start, and what's it been like?
MVP journey was an interesting one because I toiled away in the SharePoint world for literally 15 years and I'd never been an MVP. I still produced content and I had a blog called Clever Workarounds, which some SharePoint people of old might be familiar with. But it was actually through my daughter, really. I was doing stuff in the Power Platform, and my daughter, who was struggling with anxiety at the time, was doing a dead end job because that was the only thing she could sort of deal with. And it was such a terrible job. It was to do with junk mail. So we made a deal, and I said I'll pay her the same as what she's getting for junk mail if she learned Power Apps. So I started coaching and teaching her. She got really good at this stuff and now has a career in this space. So she's done really well for herself, and she's an MVP. So it's like a father-daughter thing. But she's not the only one. I sort of, from that, I went, okay, Microsoft has this vision statement of empower everyone. And as a business owner, you don't have the same amount of time, perhaps, as other MVPs who might be employees or work at consultancies to create content. But so what I can do as a business owner is engage trainees and sort of take on people that have no formal experience in this space and actually prove that vision, if that makes sense. So, Microsoft have a lofty ambition of what they want to do. They've got their big goal of empower everyone. And we're like, okay, so my best way of doing that is proving that that can be done using their technologies. And so my MVP journey is really kind of helping the journey of other people, I suppose. Very much mentoring driven and teaching people not only how the technology works, but even how to cope with complexity that inevitably happens when you're delivering projects that involve change. So, best answer I got for you.
That's good. Tell me a bit about you're talking about growing other people, which for me comes under that kind of heading of community and kind of outreach and bring others on the journey. What type of practical things are you seeing as working effectively in that space?
The most there's a difference between practical and effective. The most effective way is apprentice-based learning, where it's like Luke and Yoda. You think Star Wars. So that is by far just that osmosis tacit learning that you get from when you're working on a real project, when you have people of experience also working with bright, enthusiastic people who are keen, starting on their journey and keen to learn. But obviously that is not particularly scalable. I think also encouraging other people to work out loud and almost instilling the learning habit is probably the biggest thing. So even though you're working on projects, just getting people into that growth mindset where they actually enjoy learning, because it's like a muscle. I think learning is a habitual thing like anything else, and you get better at it, you get faster at it. So so I think just creating that environment that allows others to perhaps bootstrap their journey quicker. Now, otherwise, these days, I think I used to write a lot of blogs. I spent years and years writing content because I enjoy writing. It's just not practical anymore in terms of the time, plus the pace of change with cloud services. So I think doing things in the visual mediums like YouTube is the other. If I'm going to make a knowledge artifact, it will generally be YouTube. And then sometimes working with Microsoft on some of their initiatives as well. But that's pretty much how I managed to do that sort of stuff.
Any advice for folks out there that are, they might be working with Power Platform and might be on the Dynamics side, might be SharePoint, might be anything in the BizApps ecosystem, and they want to they think MVP might be something that should be part of their journey. What's your recommendations?
That's probably the biggest thing. I think ultimately, if you think go back to Microsoft's vision statement, they want to empower everyone, and so that means, and now if they're executing that properly, and I think they are, then literally every person in Microsoft has got that in the back of their minds in terms of when they're doing their localized, sort of planning and prioritizations and stuff like that. And so therefore, if you can find a way to help them achieve that fundamental objective, however small, you will get noticed, I think. So that for me is so I think the MVP's changed a little bit. I mean, I've had it for 3 years, but I've certainly been close friends with many MVPs over the years. I think its heritage was in technical competencies and technical skills. We're back to almost that SI versus management consulting kind of paradigm again. I think these days, completely in line with their shift of objective, going back to the vision, I think it has changed a little bit to be more, have you found a way to empower someone else to go off and get fired up and sort of learn something and become effective with these tools? If you have, then keep doing it. And because I think, you will get noticed and Microsoft will take that really seriously.
Well, our time's flown. It's been great talking to you. I always like to wrap up with a few random questions. So are you ready for your random question?
Okay.
If you could go back in time, what one thing would you tell your teenage self?
Stop being such a dick and start listening to people more.
I like it. Which famous person have you met?
Brian May.
I don't even know who Brian May is. How bad is that?
Oh my God. Are you serious?
Yep.
Didn't you watch the Bohemian Rhapsody movie?
Name doesn't ring a bell.
It's a freaking guitarist from Queen, dude.
Ah, gotcha.
And I got autographs and I sat and chatted with him for half an hour. That was huge.
Did you really? Was he the one that, in the movie?
The long-haired dude.
Yeah. Very cool. So how did that happen?
He came to Perth and a friend of mine was working at the hotel he was staying. We were all massive Queen fans and had this dodgy website back in the 1998. And he managed to convince him that this website was mega awesome. So the three of us got to interview him. I actually also know
so cool.
I also know Tim Staffel, who was the singer in Smile before Queen, and he's a friend. And I've got an autographed Smile album on my wall. Fun fact.
Incredible.
Probably the only one in the world, maybe.
What have you bought that you love so much you'd happily buy it again?
Oh, that one's out for left field. I don't know, really. That's a damn good question.
Who's someone you really admire?
There are many. I think. All right, I won't name anyone in the maybe in the technology space, but my mentor who really set me on the management consulting path, his name is Jeff Conklin, and he wrote a book called Dialogue Mapping, and it was to deal with complex problems. I really have him to thank for my whole other career. That would be the person I'd name.
I like it. Would you rather live in an apartment in the city or a mansion in the country?
Well, considering I'm actually pondering moving to an apartment in the city, from a practicality point of view, I'd say the former. But the reality is, I think everyone would rather a mansion in the country. As long as the internet's good, it's pretty sweet for me.
What was the hardest decision you've ever had to make?
The hardest decision I ever had to make was to stop doing a startup that I had invested 4 years, considerable resources, blood, sweat, and tears into. Not because the idea was bad, because the economy and the amount of effort and just the level of burnout and stress it was creating was too much. So that was a difficult decision. Yeah, and fundamentally changed how I approached projects as well too. Another one of those deep. Most experts come from being really stupid, at a certain point. Which the bigger the stupidity, the more the expertise. So I'm in that category with that one.
Paul, it's been great having you on the show. Before you go, where can people check out what you're doing from a social media perspective?
LinkedIn, obviously, easy to find me. Twitter is just at Paul Culmsee, all one word. And also have a YouTube channel with my daughter where we post various videos and bits and pieces. I do have a blog, but I don't really do the blogging thing much anymore. So cleverworkarounds.com is another avenue to find me. And then you can search for me on Amazon, and my 2 books are there. There is a website for the books. It's currently down right now. I just haven't got around to putting it back up again. So Amazon's the best place for books, I guess.
Hey, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed that show with Paul. If you have got any questions, feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn Messenger. Best way to get hold of me. Full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guy.com. Look at that, .com. No, nz365guy.com/237. Have a great week.